The first patrol car rolled up while my pickup was still parked sideways across my gravel driveway, blocking the stream of HOA contractors who had been cutting through my property all morning. Karen stood beside her white SUV in a bright red blazer, phone raised like evidence, and pointed straight at me. "Arrest him! He's blocking our emergency access road." Then Sergeant Cole stepped out, saw my face, and froze. Karen had no idea the man she wanted removed was the police chief responsible for her district. I told Cole to treat me like any other property owner, document the complaint, and call the county supervisor so I could stay out of the decision. That only made Karen louder. But when she handed over the HOA's glossy access map, I noticed something more important than her shouting. The road she claimed had never appeared on my deed. By sunset, her 911 call had created the official record that would expose exactly how the HOA had been using my land. The trouble had started 3 hours earlier, when the first dump truck rolled in from the Cedar Ridge side and ground its rear wheels into the soft shoulder beside my culvert. 2 more followed. Their tires carved dark trenches through the gravel, and the third truck dropped one wheel hard enough to crack the concrete pipe beneath the entrance. I photographed the broken edge, the fresh tracks, and the mud packed beneath each truck. Then I positioned my pickup across the narrowest section of the drive. I left enough room for a person to walk through, but no construction vehicle could pass. Karen insisted her map gave the HOA permanent access. The county supervisor studied it, then asked for a recording number or signed easement. She had neither. He explained that no officer at the scene could decide a private property claim, and entered her document into the incident record. After everyone left, I carried a copy of the map into my farmhouse. My deed was locked in a steel file box beside my title policy. I unfolded it across the kitchen table and traced every boundary description twice. There was no HOA road, no emergency connector, and no access easement. But in the lower corner of Karen's map, beneath the Cedar Ridge logo, I found a faint date printed 8 years earlier, the year before the subdivision's final plat had been recorded. That date kept me at the kitchen table long after the light outside had faded. My name is Marcus Hale, and for 14 years Hawthorne Orchard had been the one place where my job did not follow me through the door. The property covered 12 acres on the edge of Bellwether, with an old farmhouse near the center and an equipment barn beyond a row of pear trees. The driveway was the only practical route between them and Old Mill Road. It ran 420 feet from the pavement, crossed the culvert, then curved uphill toward the house. Fuel deliveries, farm equipment, and every emergency vehicle that might need to reach me depended on that strip of gravel remaining solid. When I bought the orchard, Cedar Ridge did not exist. Its eastern field was still covered in waist-high grass. Construction began 8 years ago, and the final subdivision plat was recorded the following year. A wooden fence separated the new homes from my land. Behind it, the HOA maintained a narrow service strip that ended 60 feet short of my driveway. For years, I saw only the occasional lost driver near the fence. Then Karen's board approved a major drainage project. Dump trucks began appearing without warning, using my entrance to avoid hauling equipment through Cedar Ridge's residential streets. Their shortcut saved time, but the weight was tearing apart the culvert I had rebuilt with my own hands. Rain was forecast for the weekend. If the cracked pipe collapsed, runoff from Old Mill Road would spread across the lower orchard and leave the barn inaccessible. This was no longer a disagreement about tire tracks. Karen's shortcut threatened the drainage system, the trees, and the only dependable entrance to my home. The next morning, an envelope arrived by courier. Karen had signed the letter as president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. She accused me of obstructing a designated emergency connector and demanded that I remove my truck within 24 hours. If I refused, the letter said, the HOA would impose daily fines and recover its enforcement costs. That threat told me Karen either had not checked the property records or believed I would be intimidated by official-looking paper. Hawthorne Orchard had never joined Cedar Ridge. The HOA had no authority to fine me, and I said so in a short written response. I also asked for the book and page number of the recorded easement she claimed to enforce. Instead of answering, Karen emailed a larger copy of the same color map. A blue line labeled North Connector ran from the HOA service strip, across my fence line, and directly down my driveway. There was no surveyor's certification, owner's signature, legal description, or county recording stamp. I placed it beside my deed, title policy, and the final plat I had received at closing. My documents consistently placed the drive within my parcel. Karen's blue line appeared nowhere except her map. I had spent 26 years teaching officers that confidence was not evidence. I could not abandon that rule because the dispute involved my own home. So I called Rebecca Shaw, a land use attorney who had never represented the city or my department. After reviewing the documents, she gave me the first cautious answer I trusted. Your deed looks clean, but a map is only the beginning. We need a certified survey and the subdivision's complete recording history. By noon, Rebecca had arranged both. Alicia Grant arrived the next morning in a mud-streaked survey truck, carrying a tripod, a metal detector, and certified copies of the same documents spread across my kitchen table. She began at the Old Mill Road entrance, not at Karen's blue line. That mattered. A surveyor did not start with the conclusion somebody wanted. She started with the recorded description and searched for the physical evidence that located it on the ground. Near the damaged culvert, Alicia swept the detector over a patch of weeds until it gave a sharp tone. 6 inches below the surface, she uncovered an iron pin darkened by decades in wet soil. A second monument stood near the eastern fence, hidden beneath roots and gravel. Their positions matched the calls in my deed. For the next 4 hours, she measured the entrance, the fence, the service strip, and the curve leading uphill. The result was straightforward. All 420 feet of driveway fell inside Hawthorne Orchard. Cedar Ridge's maintenance strip stopped 60 feet away, exactly where my closing plat showed it ending. Before leaving, Alicia marked the recovered monuments with orange flags and photographed each location from several angles. She backed up her field data and scheduled the signed survey for the following week. I photographed the flags beside the fence and added the images to my file. If anyone disturbed the area, we would have a dated record of what had been visible that morning. This locates the boundary, Alicia told me, tapping the survey tablet. It doesn't create or erase an easement. Rebecca still needs the recording history. Rebecca was already working on it. At the county recorder's office, she obtained certified copies of Cedar Ridge's final plat, the subdivision declarations, and every indexed instrument connected to the development. None granted Cedar Ridge access across my parcel. The planning archive explained the date on Karen's map. Before construction, the developer had submitted a preliminary concept showing a possible emergency connection to Old Mill Road. It was only a proposal. The planning file contained later engineering sheets with that line removed, and the final recorded plat showed the Cedar Ridge service strip ending at its own boundary. There was no legal description for a route across Hawthorne Orchard. There was no recording number, no signature from the previous owner, and no separate easement deed. Karen's map had preserved a line that the approved documents had abandoned. Rebecca assembled the survey findings and certified records into a formal cease and desist letter. It demanded that the HOA stop entering my property, preserve its maps and communications, identify every contractor it had sent through the driveway, and provide any instruments supporting its claim. Karen answered before the courier's delivery confirmation had cooled. She said the HOA's years of use created permanent access and that public safety required the connector to remain open. She attached no new record. Instead, she warned that blocking the route could make me personally responsible for any delayed emergency response. Rebecca called me immediately. Different kinds of access rights can exist, she said, but Cedar Ridge still has to prove the facts for whichever theory it claims. Karen cannot create one by repeating the word emergency. I forwarded the response to my personal insurance carrier and saved 3 copies. I also checked that every exterior camera was recording. The rain had begun as a fine mist, turning the damaged gravel almost black. Just after 7 the following morning, an engine growled beyond the eastern fence. Through the kitchen window, I saw a yellow road grader moving slowly down the Cedar Ridge service strip toward my property. It stopped at the 60-foot gap, lowered its blade, and started forward. I stepped onto the porch with my phone recording as the grader crossed the 60-foot gap. Its blade peeled back wet grass and pushed a ridge of mud toward Alicia's nearest orange flag. I stayed behind my fence and called the number printed on the contractor's truck, not my police dispatcher. The foreman, Luis Ortega, answered from inside the cab. I told him the company had received a cease and desist notice and that its machine was entering disputed private property. He shut down the engine and climbed out with both hands visible, more confused than hostile. "Mrs. Whitfield gave us the access plan," he said. "She told us the HOA controlled everything to Old Mill Road." Karen arrived 10 minutes later in her white SUV. My cameras captured her pointing toward the driveway and ordering Luis to continue. He refused until his office spoke with Rebecca. Karen stood in the rain, red blazer darkening at the shoulders, and accused me of intimidating a contractor with my position. I never mentioned my badge. I gave Luis Rebecca's card, photographed the grader's tracks, and returned to the house. By afternoon, the contractor had withdrawn its machine to Cedar Ridge. Karen changed tactics. She emailed every homeowner, claiming the police chief had blocked a life-saving emergency route and threatened workers performing HOA business. Copies reached City Hall before I saw the message. I immediately asked the city manager to route any complaint about the incident to an outside administrator. I also documented that I had used no department personnel, databases, vehicles, or equipment in the property case. Several residents repeated Karen's accusation online, and 2 left angry messages at City Hall. I wanted to correct every claim immediately, but Rebecca advised me to answer only through verified records. Public argument would create heat, not evidence. I issued one neutral statement confirming that an independent civil process would determine the access question, then said nothing more. The review produced something Karen had apparently never requested: the city's approved emergency access records. Cedar Ridge's fire and ambulance routes entered through its main and south gates. Hawthorne Orchard appeared nowhere in the plan. Emergency responders could still use lawful authority when a real crisis required it. But Karen's construction shortcut was not a designated public route. The rain exposed the physical cost. Water pooled above the cracked culvert, spilled over the driveway, and carried gravel into the lower orchard. A licensed excavation contractor inspected the damage after the storm. His written estimate totaled $9,400 for a new pipe, compacted base, replacement gravel, and restoration of the washed shoulder. That evening, a woman named Helen Price called my personal number. She had served as Cedar Ridge's treasurer until the previous winter. Karen's email had bothered her because Helen remembered paying invoices for something called the North Connector. We met at Rebecca's office the next day. Helen brought copies of approved meeting minutes and 3 years of contractor invoices. The board had spent HOA funds trimming brush and spreading gravel near the service strip, even though the final 60 feet and my driveway lay outside Cedar Ridge. One meeting packet contained a memorandum from the HOA's former attorney. It said a title search had not located a recorded easement and recommended obtaining written permission before using Hawthorne Orchard. Karen had received that warning months before directing the drainage crews through my entrance. Helen also explained the motive. Sending heavy equipment through Cedar Ridge's front entrance required traffic control, protective road mats, and a longer haul around occupied streets. Using my driveway removed those expenses from the drainage contract. 2 days later, Cedar Ridge's new attorney responded to Rebecca. The HOA no longer relied solely on the map. It now asserted possible implied and long-term access rights and demanded that I keep the driveway open while those claims were evaluated. Rebecca read the letter twice, placed it beside the survey, the emergency plan, Helen's records, and the $9,400 estimate, then opened a blank civil complaint on her computer. "They had notice," she said. "They entered again anyway. We file Monday." Rebecca filed the complaint that Monday in county civil court. It asked for a declaration that Cedar Ridge held no access right across Hawthorne Orchard, compensation for the physical damage, and temporary and permanent orders preventing the HOA and its contractors from entering the driveway. We did not ask the judge to punish Karen for calling 911. The call mattered because it preserved her description of the route and showed what she claimed to believe. This was still a property case, and Rebecca kept every request tied to property, evidence, and documented harm. 6 days later, both sides appeared for a temporary relief hearing. Cedar Ridge's attorney argued that residents had relied on the North Connector and that closing it created a safety concern. Rebecca presented the final plat, Alicia's preliminary field findings, the official emergency routes, and footage of the grader approaching after the cease and desist notice. The judge did not decide the entire case that morning. Instead, she temporarily prohibited routine HOA and contractor traffic while the claims were litigated. The order did not restrict police, fire, or ambulance personnel acting under lawful emergency authority. It simply stopped Cedar Ridge from treating my driveway as its construction route. For the first time in weeks, the gravel stayed quiet. To preserve the site, Alicia returned with the completed signed survey and photographed the damage against fixed measurement points. I maintained a daily access log and saved the camera files to 2 separate drives. The excavation contractor stabilized the washed shoulder, but left the failed pipe visible for inspection. Cedar Ridge's expert later examined it under an agreed protocol, so neither side could claim the evidence had been altered. Discovery lasted nearly 4 months. Cedar Ridge produced board emails, electronic map files, invoices, meeting packets, and instructions sent to its contractors. Rebecca obtained the original file behind Karen's glossy map. Its metadata connected it to the developer's preliminary planning package, not the recorded plat. The former project engineer, Samuel Vance, gave sworn testimony explaining that the proposed connector had been removed before final approval. The developer had considered seeking access across Hawthorne Orchard, but the previous owner never granted it. When the project proceeded without that right, Samuel deleted the connector from the final engineering sheets. The HOA's internal messages were even clearer. Months before the 911 call, its former attorney had told Karen and the board that no recorded easement had been found. Karen responded that the old route had been used too long to question now, and instructed the property manager to keep it on the working map. During her deposition, Karen said Sergeant Cole had confirmed that the driveway was an HOA emergency road. Rebecca placed the body camera transcript in front of her. Cole had said exactly the opposite. Officers at the scene could not determine a private access right. Karen then claimed she had relied on the city's emergency plan. The authenticated plan listed only Cedar Ridge's main and south gates. When asked where Hawthorne Orchard appeared, she answered that she had been shown a different version but could not identify who created it or where it was stored. The contradictions reached the board. 2 directors signed declarations saying they had believed the blue line came from an official plat because Karen presented it that way. A third admitted the shortcut had been promoted as a way to reduce traffic control costs during the drainage project. By the end of discovery, a majority wanted mediation. Rebecca offered a practical resolution: correct the maps, stop using the driveway, repair the culvert, reimburse survey expenses, and contribute to the legal costs created after formal notice. Karen refused to support any agreement unless I granted Cedar Ridge permanent future access. I declined. Selling convenience under pressure would turn the same false line into a real burden on my land. The court scheduled a bench trial for early autumn. On the evening before it began, I parked my pickup beside the temporary barrier and walked the length of the driveway. Fresh rain glistened on the repaired patches, and Alicia's orange flags moved in the wind. Inside Rebecca's office, 7 evidence binders waited in order: deed, title history, survey, recorded plat, planning archive, HOA communications, and damage records. The final folder contained Karen's 911 recording. Rebecca closed the last binder. "Tomorrow," she said, "we let the record speak." I entered the courtroom the next morning in a charcoal jacket and open-collar shirt. No uniform, no badge on the table, and no department vehicle outside. Karen sat across the aisle beside Cedar Ridge's board counsel. For the first time since the 911 call, neither of us controlled the room. The bench trial lasted 2 days. Cedar Ridge presented its strongest argument first. Residents and contractors had used the North Connector for years. The route appeared on an HOA map, and keeping it available would improve emergency access. Its attorney described the driveway as a practical connection that the community had come to rely upon. Rebecca did not argue that the route lacked value. She argued that convenience and ownership were different questions. Alicia walked the court through the deed calls, recovered iron monuments, and her signed survey. She explained how each measurement placed the 420-foot driveway within Hawthorne Orchard. The certified final plat showed Cedar Ridge's service strip ending 60 feet from my boundary. Samuel Vance authenticated the preliminary concept map. He testified that its blue connector line represented an option the developer hoped to negotiate, not a completed property right. When the previous owner did not grant access, Samuel removed the line from the final engineering sheets. The recorded plat reflected that change. The city's emergency planning coordinator confirmed that Cedar Ridge had approved entrances at its main and south gates. My driveway had never appeared in the official plan. Karen's repeated description of it as a designated emergency road had no support in those records. Luis Ortega testified about the grader. He said Karen had instructed his crew to proceed because the HOA controlled the route to Old Mill Road. My camera footage showed the machine crossing the 60-foot gap after the cease and desist letter. The invoices and board minutes established why. Using my land reduced traffic control and hauling costs. Then Rebecca played the 911 recording. Karen's voice filled the quiet courtroom, demanding that officers arrest me and reopen the road. The body camera footage followed. It showed Sergeant Cole refusing to decide the ownership issue and me requesting an outside supervisor. The title had explained who owned the parcel. The survey had located it. The planning archive had explained the false line. The emails showed notice. The recordings showed what Karen claimed and how carefully the officers avoided endorsing it. No single page decided the case. The documents supported one another. Karen testified that she had acted to protect Cedar Ridge, not to damage my property. I believed that part. She had convinced herself that a useful route ought to belong to the HOA. But when Rebecca asked why she ignored the former attorney's warning, Karen said the board could not afford delays or added construction expenses. I testified last. I described the occasional lost vehicle, the sudden arrival of heavy trucks, and the moment the culvert cracked. Cedar Ridge's attorney asked whether residents might have assumed the road was open because I had not stopped every mistaken driver over 14 years. I answered that turning around a lost car was not permission for an association to claim a permanent route. He also suggested my position discouraged Karen from challenging me. Rebecca responded with the independent review, the county supervisor's report, and my personal access logs. I had not issued an order, accessed a police database, or asked an officer to support my property claim. The only authority I requested came from the civil court. After closing arguments, the judge took the matter under advisement. 3 weeks later, she issued a written decision. Cedar Ridge had not proven any recorded easement. It also failed to establish the required facts for the implied and long-term access theories it had raised. The HOA had 2 approved entrances, the alleged historical use was inconsistent, and the preliminary map did not transfer a property interest. The court declared the driveway private, entered a permanent injunction against routine HOA access, and required Cedar Ridge to remove the north connector from its working maps and contractor instructions. The ruling awarded $9,400 for the documented culvert and gravel damage. That decision left survey expenses, access control costs, and the parties' remaining litigation claims unresolved. Rather than extend the case through additional motions and a possible appeal, the board returned to mediation without Karen controlling the vote. The final written settlement totaled $31,800, including the $9,400 damage award, my survey and title expenses, installation of a lawful private gate, and a negotiated contribution toward legal costs. I released the remaining monetary claims, and Cedar Ridge waived further challenge to the judgment. The money mattered because it restored what had been damaged. The injunction mattered more. It meant the blue line could not return under a different contractor or a future board. 4 days after the settlement was signed, a Cedar Ridge maintenance crew arrived at the eastern fence. This time, they stayed on their side. One worker unbolted the unofficial metal sign Karen had installed months earlier. "Emergency access," it read. He lowered it into the truck and drove away. The excavation crew returned the following week with a new concrete pipe and fresh gravel. They rebuilt the culvert, compacted the washed base, and shaped the shoulder so rainwater flowed beneath the driveway instead of across it. When the next storm came, the lower orchard stayed dry, and I could reach the barn without steering around ruts. The gate was installed inside my property line, well clear of Old Mill Road. It carried a small private drive sign and a camera aimed only at my entrance. I no longer needed my pickup to serve as a barrier. Cedar Ridge mailed every resident a corrected map and a notice confirming that Hawthorne Orchard was private property. The north connector disappeared from the HOA's contractor files, and the $31,800 settlement was paid according to the agreement. Karen's position did not survive the aftermath. Board members scheduled a recall vote after residents learned about the ignored legal warning and unnecessary litigation costs. She resigned as president before the meeting took place. The new board adopted a rule requiring recorded title review before anyone could claim access across neighboring land. Sergeant Cole stopped by one afternoon while I was pruning the pear trees. He looked toward the new gate and shook his head. That was the strangest 911 call of my career. I told him the strange part was not that Karen had called. People called the police every day hoping authority would settle an argument in their favor. The important part was that nobody at the scene pretended a badge could establish ownership. Mine certainly could not. Being police chief gave me experience with reports, recordings, and evidence preservation, but it gave me no special right to win a private dispute. The driveway remained mine because the deed, recorded plat, survey monuments, planning history, and Karen's own communications all told the same story. Months earlier, she had stood beside her white SUV and demanded that my officers arrest me for blocking my own entrance. I could have answered her anger with authority. Instead, I stepped aside and built a record. That record outlasted every accusation. For the first time in months, the only tire tracks on the drive belonged to me, and that quiet felt better than any victory. On the first clear morning after the repairs, I opened the gate and parked my pickup beside it. Sunlight ran across the new gravel toward the farmhouse. The truck no longer blocked anything. It was simply home,